Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Good afternoon. I wasn't going to compete with those bells. Good afternoon. My name is Rita Ali, and I'd like to welcome you to the City of Peoria's September 11th Remembrance Ceremony, commemorating the 20th anniversary of the tragedy of September the 11th, 2001. Peoria joins other cities and communities across the nation to honor and to recognize the fallen, the heroes, and those forever impacted by the act of terrorism that took place 20 years ago today. We feel obligated to recognize this important anniversary and pray that such a tragedy never occurs again. Today's brief ceremony, about 30 minutes long, begins with the posting of colors by the Peoria Fire Department Honor Guard, followed by the Star-Spangled Banner, sung by Peoria County Clerk Rachel Parker. Peoria Fire Chief Jim Bachman will ring his bell 20 times, recognizing the 20-year 9/11 anniversary. This will be followed by brief reflections by members of the Peoria City Council and local first responders.
Ready? Post. Present. Oh.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
If you are able, would you remain standing for the ringing of the bell 20 times to commemorate the 20 years that have passed since 9/11?
You may be seated. September 11th, 2001 is a day like many others I will never forget. While I was in Peoria witnessing the events that took place that day from my home television, I felt the pain, the connection with my fellow human beings of all races, all ages, all religions, and all walks of life in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and in those aircraft that were terrorized from the air. That day, we became one America, tied together by our tragedies, our bonds, and our love for humanity. I often ponder that feeling and ask, why does it take a tragedy to bring us together? I believe that there are lessons that we can learn from that day 20 years ago that can help us all to show more compassion and more love for one another, to show more solidarity with one another. When I look at the Twin Towers in Peoria, I'm reminded of the Twin Towers in New York City. The innocent people and the heroes that died when the buildings came tumbling down. The first responders, the firefighters, the police officers, the ambulance, and the public work employees. They put me in mind of the buffalo. In the animal world, most animals when they know that a storm is coming, they start moving in the opposite direction. What buffalo do, on the other hand, is very unique for the animal kingdom. Buffalo wait for the storm to cross over the crest of the peak of the mountaintop. And as the storm rolls over the ridge, the buffalo turn and charge directly into the storm. Instead of running east away from the storm, they run west directly at the storm. They tackle it head on. That's what first responders did on 9/11 20 years ago. And that's what they do every day across the globe and right here in our Peoria community. I thank them and I honor them today and every day. I now welcome Councilman Dennis Sear. He will be followed by another song and Fire Chief Jim Bachman. Councilman Sear.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's difficult not to get emotional on September 11th. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, I remember being 4 blocks away from here at work and watching with my assistant in my office and having tears coming down my face about what was going on in New York. And it's difficult not to follow these tears with anger. And even today, I was getting ready, and obviously on television this morning, there was a lot of reports and a lot of memories about 9/11. It's, again, all these feelings are coming back. Very difficult times, really, for all of us, and even 20 years later. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. Most of the people know that. And excuse me. On that day, I decided that Peoria is my home. This country is my home. And I decided I was going to become American. Seven days ago, I celebrate me becoming American. 17 years ago, on September 3rd, 2004. I will always remember there's not a lot of things we can do, or I can do personally, but I have 2 daughters. One was 1 year old when it started, the other one was not born. And my contribution, I guess, to this is to never forget what happened 20 years ago, and we got to teach our kids about what happened 20 years ago. Sorry about getting emotional here. Want me to do an introduction now? I want to introduce a good friend of mine. I didn't know him very well 4 years ago, and I don't know why somebody would want to be a councilman for 6 terms. This gentleman needs no introduction, and I got a tremendous amount of respect for him. Councilman Chuck Graham.
"20 years ago, on this day, I was an administrator for Peoria Public Schools, and my assignment on September 11th had me at the Adult Education Center, which is now the Buddhist Temple, at 839 West Moss Avenue. A little before 9 o'clock in the morning, my custodian came in, almost running into my office, and he said, "Mr. Graham, do you have your radio on?" I said, "No, but we can turn it on." He said, "You better get it on right away." And of course, we all know what was happening. So we called hastily the faculty members to meet outside the principal's office, and we invited our students to watch, if they wished, on television. We had televisions arrayed throughout the entire building, and they did. But let's go back a few years. Let's go back to 1941. In Japan, there was a meeting of high-level leaders and military generals, and they made a fatal and fateful decision. All except one of them wanted to do what they did, and that is to attack the United States of America at Pearl Harbor. One of those generals said, "I'm warning you, you may think Americans are fractious, divided people, but if you attack them, they will rise up in righteous anger and they will destroy you." Well, what he said was not well received, and they went ahead and they attacked us. And on 9/11, they attacked us. Local reaction, I can tell you everybody in Peoria was in shock. We had Mayor David Ransberg then, and he and the council made a decision to have a meeting of the public in the building right behind us, the Civic Center. Public invited, just like this, so we could all come together to show our solidarity as Americans. And we were saying to each other, everything's going to be all right. And everything will be all right as long as we continue to stick together. May God bless America, and may God bless our emergency responders who work all over this country, all over the world, and may God bless our troops. And now, my privilege to introduce Councilwoman Denise Jackson.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. Well, I never thought I'd see myself standing here, but it is a privilege and an honor to address you all this 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. I remember that day vividly. I was working. We were at Channel 25 attempting to cover the news. And as a reporter, you're supposed to try to cover these events in a neutral, objective fashion. But as the day moved on, I remember vividly things coming to a halt. The news came to a halt, at least the news of the day as we saw it. And by the end of the day, what was an objective mindset had become one of enormous sadness. I didn't take anything for granted, and it reminded me so much how when tragedy occurs, we tend to not look at each other differently. We find ways to look at each other as human beings. We find ways to just reach out and help one another. And 9/11 brought us together in a way that I have never witnessed in my lifetime. And the unfortunate situation is too often we quickly forget how we are so uniquely bonded together as human beings, not as men and women, not as black people, not as white people. But my prayer and hope is that as we move forward, that we will continue to take that unity that we have developed over those years, and that we will once again be energized, and that we will once again become united, because as we all know, we're facing a greater pandemic, and they're calling it 9/11 multiplied. So my hope and prayer is that we as human beings will not let the politics of the day divide us, and that we will once again find common ground to work together for the betterment of all human beings. Thank you, and God bless you. At this time, I would like to introduce Councilwoman Beth Jensen.
I'm honored to be here today to commemorate the anniversary of this awful tragedy that hit our country 20 years ago. 20 years ago today, at 7:45 in the morning, I was getting ready to come to work here at City Hall. And across the news that was in the background, the first tower was in smoke. And I stayed and watched when the next tower was hit about 30 minutes later. I'm honored to be here today so we can remember all those firefighters, police officers, emergency responders who heroically, without hesitation, went into those crumbling, smoky towers to save people, to do what they do every day. We honor and remember them. We honor and remember the passengers on Flight 93 who came together heroically in just a few minutes and overcame those hijackers and diverted the plane and saved us from another horrible tragedy. We honor and remember all of those who died, who were injured, who continue to suffer as a result of what happened 20 years ago today. And most importantly, we remember how the entire country came together and united as a nation to overcome together the tragedy that occurred. Thank you all for being here today. We must always remember and ultimately come together and remember that we are stronger united and that we have more in common than what divides us. And with that, I introduce my colleague, Councilman John Kelly.
"20 years ago, my wife and I were on a flight from here to Atlanta, Georgia. We landed at about 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. The pilot told us that something had happened, there was some mishap or whatever, and we should get to our connecting gate as soon as we could, which we did. And on the way, it's a big airport down there. On the way, we found out that a plane had flown into one of the twin towers in New York. I was reminded, not from my memory, but from what I'd read, about a plane that had flown into the Empire State Building in the late 40s or early 50s. As a matter of fact, it took out Caterpillar's Caterpillar's New York office. So I thought, gosh, this is really terrible. And by the time we got to the tram, somebody said, a plane hit the other tower. And I thought, this is Osama bin Laden. Well, no one knew what to do. Everyone in the entire airport was told to get down to baggage claim. All of the concourses were emptied. And if any of you have been to that airport, you know that we're talking tens of thousands of people, and all down in baggage claim at the same time. There were lines, people trying to find out what was going on, lines, people trying to get something on their cell phones, etc., etc. But the thing that impressed me the most was that in the midst of this tragedy,
There were no important people there. There were no rich people. There were no poor people. There were no politicians. There were no black people. There were no white people. Everyone there was an American. If someone needed help, they were surrounded by others. There was no panic. No one knew what was going on. No one knew when we were going to get out of that airport. There were no TVs going. We weren't watching, but we were being informed. But these were all Americans, united, calmly, steadfastly, sometimes emotionally, but all Americans. As those days have proceeded, and we are now 20 years later, let us remember, in all of our controversies, etc., that we remain all Americans, loving each other, loving our country, and thanking God for the good things that we have. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Zach Euler.
I'm generally a bit of an off-the-cuff public speaker, but the gravity of today really called for time of reflection and putting some thoughts in writing, so I'll be doing a little bit more reading today. 17 years old, sitting in high school current events class, suddenly hearing the commotion in the hallway. Turn on the TV, turn on the TV. In the blink of an eye, our world's changed. Kids learning in an instant what current events really means. That was really the turning point for many of us coming of age to realize the world isn't this safe place where we hang out at the mall, ride bikes, and go to the public pool together. We found out that day that the world can be a very scary and unsafe place. Our nation is under attack. Many generations before us knew what that meant, but we didn't. Suddenly, we were thrust into this new world of a nation sitting by the TV with more questions than answers. Lines at the gas pump, and classmates joining the military. May we never forget what happened that day. I know I won't. May we never forget the men and women that died that day and their families. May we never forget the public servants that responded that day and the months and years after. From 17 years old, sitting in current events class, to standing here 20 years later, I think how fortunate I am to be here and to live in this country and be protected by those who serve us. God bless our nation. Thank you. And I now welcome my colleague, Councilman Tim Riggenbach.
Good afternoon. You know, for people in my parents' generation, they always talked about where they were the day John Kennedy got shot. For those of us my age, we'll never forget where we were when we heard the news about 9/11. I was in my office at Middle Illini Express, and Randy Leitner walks in and says he just got a call from his wife and a plane hit one of the Twin Towers. We looked at each other puzzled, of course, and turned on the TV, and the world's never been the same. You know, we talk a lot about our first responders and the unfathomable bravery they showed that day. The policemen and firefighters running into the buildings when everybody else was trying to get out. 10 years ago at Von Steuben Middle School, my daughter Amanda wrote an essay and was allowed to read it at the school assembly that day. And she talked about cowards becoming courageous. And I thought that was kind of an odd expression, but I think it exemplifies how the common people who were walking the streets found a sense of bravery, found a sense of courage that they never had before. You know, in today's environment, it's kind of hard to imagine the kind of civility and caring that we saw that day and in the days following. But I hope that's something that we take away from the remembrances today across the country, that we don't need to wait for a tragedy to unite us again. Let's put aside our differences. Let's remember what unites us. Let's join arms and do this together, because that's who we truly are as Americans. Thank you all for coming. God bless you, and God bless the United States. And now my colleague and friend, Councilman Sid Reckriegel.
We stand in front of you, one council, but 11 different members. Each of us has a story about where we were, and each one in the audience here and within our city who was alive on that fateful day has a story. Mine, I was on my way to Landmark to go to the gym before work, and the first tower was hit while I was in the parking lot. And over the next hour and a half or so, as we watched as a group inside Landmark and checked on the people, our teams at the stores, we saw unfold something that was unfathomable for us. But I was just one person. And somewhere else in the world, there was one mother who dropped their student off for class, expecting to pick them up at the end of the day. One person stopped for coffee on their way to work. One person grabbed the bus on their way to be able to go to the office of the Twin Towers. One firefighter showed up for their what was to be an average shift. And on Flight 93, one flight attendant was able to help one passenger be able to find a seat. And in 102 minutes, with the use of only 4 planes, we were reminded that the ideals of our complicated history as a nation are not so far away, and that we are one nation, one people, and one community. We were reminded of what we always knew, but it's upon ourselves to be able to act and make happen. We each have a story. For me, the words up here are extremely powerful, and the words that we'll hear throughout the day. But there are a couple of things that, to me, are even more powerful. One that has always been with me is that haunting sound of the oxygen tanks of the firefighters that didn't make it out of the Twin Towers. For so long, I thought that that was just the fire alarms that were in the rubble. And when you realize that each one of those was an oxygen tank on somebody who didn't make it out, you understand that there was a life that went forward and went in to be able to put themselves at sacrifice. That is what our nation is built on. It's built on pure heroism of our firefighters, our police officers, our paramedics, and our everyday heroes that showed up that day. The second was the silence. And many of you that were alive will remember the silence of day 2 when there were no planes. And there was this eeriness when you walked outside, and that silence is powerful. May we always remember that when we hear that silence and catch it, that it is one more glimpse of a reminder of a day 20 years ago. And the third is our ability to make sure that we never forget. And it's not by our words. It's not by what we say here today. It is not by what we do here today. It is by living the ideals that we learned that day, that we were reminded that we are as a nation, and make that happen when people are asking and even when they're not. We saw amazing heroism out of unsung, normal people who were just going about their daily life. May we never forget. Thank you. It is my sincere privilege to be able to introduce our newest member of council, Councilmember Karen Velpula, to be able to speak next. Thank you.
Good afternoon. 20 years ago, we witnessed the most tragic, horrific, and brutal attack on the American soil. The perpetrators so hated what this country represents, so they cowardly attacked the normal Americans going about their daily lives. blind allegiance to an ideology, developing a hatred towards a cause where the optimism, free of speech is forbidden. And again, unfortunately, I don't come from a place where terrorist attacks happen. In India, growing up in India, terrorist attacks happen from time to time, but not at the scale of September 11, 2001. So in my opinion, there should be no one to fear about going to work. There should be no one going to even for a grocery store for the fact of being killed. The United States is a country which champions the freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and they celebrate individual liberty. So for the past 14 years, I call this country, which is the greatest nation, as my home since becoming an American citizen. The lives lost on September 11th can never be replaced, and the families impacted can never be fully healed. Those that survived the events of the day still suffer with physical, mental, and emotional trauma. So it has been said that those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it. We must forget that one day which changed the whole nation. The people of this country are strong and resilient, and over time, we will become better if we come up together as a nation. The United States is composed of diverse people with diverse beliefs, but we can be united by a common bond, that is freedom. Focusing on what unites is a far better motive than getting trapped in the downward spiral of divisiveness. America's strength is visible in its people and resiliency. After any setback throughout the country's history, we've come back stronger. We continue to do so today, honoring those who have lost, by the way, remembering the impact they made while they are here. Today, we honor those who passed on September 11th, the first responders, the police officers, the firefighters, and the medical staff who cared for them, and the families left behind. Let's never forget their ultimate sacrifice. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Good afternoon. Before I get started, I feel it's appropriate for me to introduce or point out a friend that I made this morning. Chris Kelleher and his wife Mary are here. Chris Kelleher retired in April from New York City Fire Department. Chris was at Ground Zero. He was captain on Engine 216 out of Brooklyn. Chris met up with us this morning at Central House. Said he felt like he just needed to be around some firefighters this morning. Chris's crew arrived at Ground Zero just as a third building collapsed. Chris's entire crew did not return to the fire station that day. Chris, thanks for reaching out. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for your sacrifice. 20 years ago today, I was preparing to walk out of the house because I had some errands to run. It was my day off. I was 31 years old and have 7 years as a Peoria firefighter. As I went to turn off the TV, I caught a glimpse of downtown New York skyscraper that was on fire. Katie Couric and Matt Lauer were speaking with another news correspondent who had phoned into the show trying to get confirmation on what might have caused the damage to the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Just a few minutes later, I think it became clear to everyone what was happening as a second plane flew into the South Tower. My first thoughts were with all the people that had not only just perished in those two planes, but all of the people inside the buildings in the immediate areas of impact. The disbelief of this happening on American soil and knowing that anyone above the points of impact were not likely to make it out was an enormous amount to process. My emotions were all over the place, from disbelief to sorrow, and then to anger. Just then the South Tower collapsed, and then followed by the North Tower. I literally sat on the edge of my sofa and watched the news as minutes turned into hours. The disbelief grew into fear as reports of a plane hitting the Pentagon and one crashing in the field in Pennsylvania began to filter in. Nearly 3,000 people died on 9/11, including 343 firefighters, 23 New York City police officers, and 37 Port Authority police officers. Thousands more have been diagnosed with 9/11 related cancers since that day. The display of heroism and bravery by firefighters and police officers on 9/11 was incredible. So many of them filing in stairwells one after the other so that they could make an attack on the fire and evacuate as many people as possible. If there was anything positive that came out of this in the coming days and weeks, it was the overwhelming kindness by complete strangers that was being displayed everywhere you turned, and in the sense that I had of a unified nation like I had never felt before. Many firefighters from across the country, including some Peoria firefighters, traveled to New York to attend the funerals of the fallen firefighters. Today, 20 years later, we stand here unified again, together as a community in remembrance of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. May we never forget them, and God bless them and their families. And with that, I'll introduce Police Chief Chief Echevarria.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a privilege to be in front of you today. In the early morning hours of September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers took control of 4 airliners taking off from Boston, Washington, D.C., and Newark, New Jersey. 20 years to this date, we saw the tragic events unfold, and we felt the devastation that took the lives of over 3,000 men, women, and children. Today, we're here to remember the lives of those lost on that day and the countless who lost their lives after. The images of that day still lay vivid for many of us. Some of us weren't born on that day, and it's just a time in history. Either way, these events have changed our lives forever. I remember that day clearly. I was a young 2.5-year rookie officer. We were training in a funeral home as an honor guard and a color guard and practicing our ceremonial moves in case we needed to use them. TV was on. We looked in disbelief as we saw the tragic events that were unfolding in front of us. I remember thinking, I'm 2 years out of the United States Marine Corps, still 2 years into my inactive reserve, and I was ready to put that uniform back on and go out and fight for this country at that moment. I then remembered I'm still a police officer. We packed up, put on our uniforms, got in our squad cars, and went out to protect our city. It wasn't a moment to think about myself. It wasn't a moment to think about what our needs were, but rather a time to think about a community that now needed us more than ever. We were ready to stand united to protect our country, states, and cities. We were there to remind our community that we would not abandon them, but rather we were going to do everything in our power to make sure that they were safe. Let us never forget that those that courageously lost their lives laying their lives down to save others, the passengers of Flight 93 who fought the hijackers, the brave firefighters and police who gave their lives trying to save others, and the countless men and women who joined the military after 9/11 to protect our country. Let us also remember the families they left behind. Those families of the police, firefighters, and military personnel that were in the background supporting those men and women that went out every day to safeguard our communities and country. Without them, people like myself, firefighters, first responders that are out here, can't do what we do for our communities. Moments like these have tested America, but have also brought us together. There is strength in union, and we are much more powerful and likely to succeed when we work together towards a common purpose. Let's continue to stand united against those forces that want to bring unrest, disorder, and division among us as people. We must stand united. And I will end with this. Luke 11:17 states, "Any kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and a house divided against itself will fall." Thank you, and I now present Public Works Director Rick Powers.
Thank you and good afternoon. Much like Councilor Euler, I'm going to have to write my comments, but for a different reason. I'm a man of few words, as most of you know me, speaking publicly but on a day like today, it brings back a lot of memories that keep me from speaking freely, frankly. And I usually find myself surrounded with brilliance, like right now, so I can just stay out of the way. So leadership is easy when you find people like this. So as I recall, as the mayor asked me to reflect on 20 years ago, just some things that seemed cliche at some times in my life sparked fire in me again. And one of them was just to remember this, because of some things that have, what we believe came to culmination here just not that long ago, 20 years into, not after, but sparked a war that we believe has ended that hasn't. And for those people, let me tell you this, because I know freedom has a flavor the protected will never know. And sometimes it's hard to live with that. But I also know that freedom is an ideal that burns inside of us as Americans. It's like a flame that doesn't consume you, but inspires you. It keeps driving you, but it doesn't burn you. It's just there. It just keeps you going. So, me, again, amongst other things, like the chief, and by the way, Semper Fidelis, Chief, I find myself a retired Marine of 21 years active service. And 20 years ago, less than 5 years removed from taking off my blues. And working for a city department in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana. And again, less than 5 years removed from that, wanting to don my uniform and get back in the fight. I was a lot older than the chief. I was retired and knew that that wasn't realistic. But I also looked around and found some familiar things inside of me for some reason. Because another memory popped into my head. About 18 years prior to that, on October 23rd, 1983, a very similar cowardice act took place in Beirut, Lebanon. And I was there. And a coward bombed our barracks, and 241 Marines and soldiers lost their lives. And I was left to crawl through rubble, finding dead brothers in arms and wounded. But it was a hard day. And it's a day seared in my heart, as you can probably tell. So I thought of that for some reason. Of all things, with this chaos all around me, I thought back to that and realize just how novel we are not, or that their idea was not. It is not something that hadn't happened before. It just happened on a scale that we hadn't seen on our soil. And it hurt. And we all stood still, and we all changed. And we haven't been the same since. So, as I looked around, it was time to close, and it probably happened here, but there was an order: close all public buildings. We probably all remember that were around. Close everything and go home. So there I stood, now a department director in the city of Indianapolis, called everyone into a very large assembly room, and they were looking to me. You could see it in their eyes. What do we do? What are we going to do? And I realized I had to say something. So what I told them was, don't let them win. What they wanted, and what they still want to this day, is for us to live in fear, not to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. At this very moment, I would say the same thing to all of you. Don't let them win. Don't be afraid. Because that's exactly what will give them a victory. And we can't allow that. That's when America perishes. When that flame inside of us called freedom comes down upon us. So sometimes there's a higher calling, like freedom. And even further back in history, thousands of years ago, I'll close with this. There was another flame that burned that didn't consume a bush. And it spoke to a man, and it said to him, remove your shoes. You're standing on hallowed ground. As we look around and we see those things where people, where Americans died in the name of freedom in that flame, I want to say to all of us, remove your shoes. You're standing on hallowed ground. Remember, always remember. Thank you. Semper Fidelis. With that, I would like to introduce the CEO of Advanced Medical Transport, Andrew Rand.
Sorry about the wobble. The crisis. There are times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands now deserves the love and the thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation to hold, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776.
I want to close by saying thank you to each of you for coming out today in commemoration of the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. Also to my colleagues for their heartfelt reflections today. This evening at dusk, the bridge will be lit. Mary Baker Bridge will be lit in red, white, and blue as a tribute to the 20th anniversary, as with the similar bridge lightings that will take place all across America. So let us go, let's never forget, but let us leave with greater love for one another and greater solidarity. God bless you and God bless America.